Well, hello there everyone, Matt here with thevirtualinstructor.com, and in this video I'd like to share with you the entire process of creating a colored pencil drawing of a portrait of a spider from start to finish with you. Now, this time-lapse comes from a recent course, which is part of our membership program over at thevirtualinstructor.com. The course is called Pencils on Polyester, a different way to colored pencil. Now, the reason why this surface is so interesting is because it behaves completely different than traditional surfaces that we typically use with colored pencils. This surface erases very easily and allows you to apply light applications, building up layers of color without putting a lot of pressure on the pencil. This surface is also really tough too, so it can take quite a bit of abuse. Now, there are some disadvantages to using this paper, and clearly there are some advantages as well, and we cover all of this in this course. Now, this course, as I mentioned, is part of our membership program, which includes a variety of drawing and painting courses on a variety of subject matter and media, weekly live lessons, which are broadcast and then recorded and saved in our vault, weekly critiques as part of the Members Minute, and a year-long curriculum for visual arts teachers. Now, if you're new to the channel or if you haven't done so yet, I would encourage you to subscribe to the channel and click on that notification bell so you're notified when we upload new videos like this. And if you want to check out 3 of our course videos and ebooks for free, you can do that as well. I'll leave a link in the description below. So without further ado, let's go ahead and dive into the video. So what is this wonderful paper? Well, it's polyester film, and the brand I'm using in this video is Duralar. So as you can see, the first step here was simply to put our backing paper behind the Duralar paper and then create a grid on the Duralar paper. And this grid, of course, is proportional to the photo reference. So each one of the squares with the grid on the photo reference matches up with the grid square on the drawing surface. And this, of course, allows me to take the visual information from the photo reference and transfer it over in the form of lines onto the drawing surface. Now, initially, I used a 2H graphite pencil for these initial marks. I didn't want these marks to be too strong, and of course, I didn't want the graphite to interfere with the colored pencil applications to follow. Now, typically when I begin a drawing like this, I find an area where I feel comfortable, and a lot of times that's with the eyes. So if there's an eye in the drawing anywhere, that's usually where I start. So I started with the far left eye here, and you can see initially I was layering some blues and some browns, but then switched over to the black pencil. I wanted to make sure that the blacks didn't appear too flat and had a little bit of color associated with them. You can also see there's some strong highlights in there as well, and of course that helps create the illusion that the eyes are actually wet and a different texture from the furry body around it. Then, of course, it was time to start formulating the colors that I was going to use for this drawing. So in these early stages, whenever I'm creating a colored pencil drawing, I experiment with different colors to try to find the right combination of colors to work with. And in this particular case, I ended up using a variety of different greens, both warm and cool greens here, and also a variety of oranges and some earthier oranges that lean a little bit closer towards brown. But I never know which colors I'm actually going to use until I start making marks on the surface. Ended up using quite a bit of different colors here. Now, this surface, as you might can tell from this video, doesn't really accept the colored pencils like other surfaces like Stonehenge paper or even Bristol paper. This paper, of course, is very smooth, so the marks that you make with the pencil are still going to be visible to a certain degree. This, of course, encourages maybe lighter applications throughout the process. So in most colored pencil drawings, you want to build up heavy applications, whether that's with additional pressure earlier in the process or by layering lots of layers to build up a more solid application. With this paper, however, it actually encourages the artist to put lighter layers on the surface. So if you like drawing with a lighter touch, you might really enjoy working with this surface. You can see that we can still build up some complexity in the color with this surface, but the contrast isn't quite as strong as what we would expect on more traditional drawing surfaces like the Stonehenge paper. Now, you'll also notice that I'm using the eraser quite frequently and also the color black. This surface, since it mutes the color to a certain degree or makes it a little bit more faded, the black quite isn't as strong as it is on traditional papers, and that allows us to use black as you might expect to use black. Typically, you would want to mix a black when working with colored pencils to make a more natural looking appearance, but with this particular surface, you can get away with using black on its own. Now, again, I mentioned using the eraser. This surface erases colored pencils very easily, and I also use a tool called the slice tool throughout the process too, to scrape away the colored pencil applications. This works great for creating fur and hair and anywhere where you need a strong white line in this particular case. Now, of course, if you had a different colored paper underneath this surface, it would look a little bit different. Of course, that paper is going to show through the Duralar because the Duralar is transparent. So you can see the directional strokes, of course, are important in this drawing, just like they are in any drawing that you create. So I'm trying to concentrate on creating this texture through the relationships of different values, so the dark values next to the light values, and also the directional strokes, especially in and around these wonderful spider eyes. All right, moving forward just a bit in the process, you can see that once we've got a good idea of the colors that we're going to use, it's basically just repeating those layered applications as we work our way across the top part of the head of the spider here. Now, another great thing about this paper is that you can create kind of a blurry look relatively easily, and this of course is beneficial if you're trying to create a drawing that somewhat replicates photography, because when we're working from a photo reference, a lot of times we see that due to the focus of the camera, some of the areas around and behind the subject can be blurred out, and that can sometimes be difficult to capture on traditional drawing papers that have a heavier tooth. But this surface, it's very easy to create that effect. Now, of course, as I worked down the picture plane and encountered a different section, I had to come up with a different formulation of colors to layer here. I tried to use colors that were similar to the colors above, so the greens that were located a little bit further down on the picture plane incorporated some of the same greens that we used above to, again, ensure some harmony and unity in the piece. And most of the oranges were very similar to the oranges that were incorporated around the eyes, but a little bit more yellow was used in the mixture. So here's a good look at how this slice tool works on the surface. You can see that it's easy to scrape out those longer hairs here and then work back in with the colored pencils around them to further define the edges. And you can also use some grays in and around some of those hairs there to create some subtle shadows, and that will create some depth. And then, of course, as I worked across, I had some of those hairs that would cross over each other here. So in this particular area, I just made sure that I paid attention to the dark shapes in between each one of the hairs and allowed those dark shapes to define the areas of lighter value. Then I would go back in with some of those lighter yellows, oranges, to fill in those spaces. And of course, you can go back and forth with the darker values and the lighter values. And then, of course, it's easy to erase out some of those highlights and then pull out some of those highlights with the slice tool. And of course, some of those wonderful hairs as well. Now, even when some of those areas were scratched out, I did go back with a light value, somewhat of an off-white, to add a bit of color to them. Just like with black, white can seem a little out of place sometimes and make an image look flat. So adding just a little bit of color, it still is going to translate as a white, but it's going to make it appear a little bit more natural. Now, of course, as you probably can gather, I really loved using the slice tool on this surface. I found that the eraser worked really well too. The eraser worked better for the areas where the edges weren't quite as sharp. So if I needed to pull out a hair that we didn't have really strongly defined edges, then I would use the eraser or highlight, for example. But for the areas where we had those defined hairs, that slice tool worked really, really well. Now, as I worked down here to the lower part of the leg, somewhat of a different approach compared to what I used right above. I kind of defined some of the darker areas first with the black pencil, and then went back in with some grays and some light yellows to add a bit of color, and then again with the eraser and the slice tool. And then I could go back and refine the shapes around some of the hairs again with the black pencil. And here again, directional stroking is clearly important in communicating the texture. And texture really is communicated through the relationships of values, as I mentioned earlier, and the directional stroking. Of course, the surface texture of the paper does play a role as well, and also the medium that you're using. But the two big things to consider when developing texture is the relationship of value, that's the darks and the lights. So how you position dark values next to light values and middle values will influence the illusion of texture, and also the directional strokes that you make with either a pencil or a paintbrush. Now, of course, we had some larger hairs sticking out from the bunch here, and those were easily pulled out using the eraser. So again, this was an example of where I used the eraser to pull out some of the softer strokes, as opposed to the slice tool, which created those really sharp edged marks. Now, of course, in any drawing where you have somewhat of a repetitive pattern like we have with these overlapping hairs, you don't have to follow the reference exactly. You want to refer to the reference, of course, to try to pick up on a pattern that you can replicate in the image so that it will translate properly to the viewer. Remember, you're creating an illusion when you're creating a drawing, so everything doesn't have to be exactly the same as the reference, but you can pick up on little hints and things that you gather from the reference, like these patterns, and then repeat a similar pattern in your drawing, and it should translate just fine to your viewer. So don't get overwhelmed with all the details that you see. In many cases, we can simplify those details into a basic pattern. Now, once I had the first bottom part of the leg figured out, of course, all I needed to do was repeat those layered applications on the second leg on the right side of the picture plane. Now, of course, any colored pencil drawing requires patience, which is one very easy area that you can improve upon. Just take your time, slow down, work slowly, and allow your drawing to take shape. Remember that it's not a race when you're creating a piece of artwork. It's okay to slow down. Now, this drawing took quite a number of hours, but I was quite pleased with the end result. Thanks so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you were able to pick up a couple of things here and there. Thanks again for watching, and as always, I wish you all the very best in your artistic success.